Okay, the big 3.25 announcement was yesterday. There is a ton of stuff going on. Everyone's super excited, including me. Lots of people have questions, and I'm going to try to answer all the big ones that I can. Hi, it's Lerald, and this is the intro to the video. Please like and subscribe, and let's just get into it. Okay, I'm going to run through some very quick FAQ stuff here. First off, right off the bat, the main question that has been asked overwhelmingly, is Toxic Rain Pathfinder still good? Yeah, it's still good. Now, Forbidden Rite Pathfinder is another thing that has been asked about a lot, and I'll pull up Hexblast Machination. This is definitely the item that is not mandatory to that build, right? You can play Forbidden Rite Pathfinder without a Hexblast, but the way that I built it, the way that I liked it, Hexblast was, like, crucial. And it's completely dead now. There is absolutely no way to make Hexblast Machination work with any sort of caster build at all, and that is because Vol Pact has been redesigned. Instead of being this, total recovery per second from life regen, or life leech is doubled and no life regen, it now works like this. If I can pull up Path of Pathing, PoE is not updated yet, but Path of Pathing is. It runs a little slow since it's running in the browser, so bear with the fact that it's kind of jank. Life leech from melee damage is instant, which is insanely good for melee builds that have a fair amount of like leech. That's really great. Cannot recover life other than from leech. So if you're playing a Hexblast Machination build and, you know, anything that has Vol Pact in it, and it doesn't melee, which obviously Forbidden Rite Pathfinder's not going to do, it can't recover life at all. All right, Mjolnir Hierophant is another build I got asked about, and just to look up Archmage in the patch notes, it wasn't nerfed. Archmage is fine. The only thing that really was nerfed that I can think of, you know, I've got a lot of plate spinning, so maybe I missed something, but I don't think so. The only thing that was nerfed from that I can think of is that Battle Mage's Cry no longer gives your attacks the ability to benefit increases to spell damage, which means you can't get the feedback loop of like getting a lot of damage and then using Iron Will to like apply to your spell damage and then filtering that back into your damage with Battle Mage's Cry. This was specifically a nerf to the strength stacking replica Alberon's Warpath Juggernaut that I was playing as well, where you use that exact feedback loop, and that did cut that build, you know, basically just to pull up my hob here. For that, essentially all that did was Dual Strike Juggernaut. If I look at this build, basically that just turned off Battle Mage's Cry, so it would go like this: 83 million DPS before, 32 million DPS after. Rough stuff. Now there is some other stuff that has happened that'll affect the Mjolnir Hierophant. For one, you can no longer automate your war cries. I cannot remember the name of the new skill. Auto Exertion, I believe they call it. So you can automate them. Call to Arms no longer casts them repeatedly, like, without a horrible tax. It now reserves 15% of your mana per supported war cry to automatically trigger those war cries. And that's actually a pretty significant reservation cost, certainly for the Mjolnir Hierophant, any sort of mana stacker. You're not going to be reserving any mana, so this is completely dead for that build. It would be dead for, I think, most builds. I'm not going to be reserving 15% of my mana to chain cast them. I'm just going to cast them by hand. And, you know, that's okay. Ultimately, that wasn't really essential for the build to function. I would say that Battle Mage's Cry has not been all nerfs. You know, it now grants crit chance, and the buff at max power, you know, it's 0.5% of flat crit chance per 5 power up to 25. So 2.5% crit chance just straight up with no buffs to the war cry effect at all. That's pretty good. This does mean that you're going to be able to leech quite a bit less mana, like your sustained mana leech. If we bounce out of here and go back to the Mjolnir Hierophant and we just turn off Battle Mage's Cry, we can look at like Battle Mage's Cry. It wasn't contingent, you know, we weren't relying on that for our main damage link, the actual skill that's in the Mjolnir to function, but the damage from Cyclone, as you can see, like 45k combined DPS instead of 160k, so we're getting quite a bit less mana leech, so the sustain is definitely down. I do think that hits the build. It may still, you know, it'll definitely still be functional. It may have lost some of its ceiling. There's definitely some other stuff that you'll be able to do to fix that, but I gotta say, ultimately, this was something that was kind of a build I wanted to stop in on and play and like see how I liked it, and I may go back to that well, but I may be slamming a lot more in the next league and less interested in going back to this. I'm not sure. As for the strength stacking replica Alberon's Warpath Jug, I feel that that build is not actually dead, but the way that I put it together has definitely been gutted. You know, it went from 80 million DPS down to 30. That's pretty rough stuff. Okay, now to talk about some of the builds that I played over the last couple of weeks. I'll start with Bonezone Jug. This build, I think, mostly got buffed. You know, if we look at the patch notes, we can look at Bone Shatter. And Bone Shatter had a damage bonus. It scales up to 338 as opposed to previously 250. Now, yes, they did remove Ancestral Protector and War Chief, so that was like 40% more damage or something with those totems down. But they've kind of replaced those with several other things, like Rage, for example. Rage is really good now if we look at Rage here in the Path of Pathing. So Rage now gives you more attack damage. Your max Rage is 30, but with Rage passives around the tree, a fair number of them around the tree here, you can get your max Rage up to... I had written this down before. There's like 5 here, 10 here, 5 here, and 6 here. So that's like an extra 21 Rage. So you can get like 51 rage, 51% more attack damage. That is more than you were getting out of totems. There are also banners that you can play around with. War Banner in particular has really struck my fancy. Now I will kind of jump into the game here and kind of show off something that I've seen a lot of people say, oh, banners, banners, their totems are back. The difference is, and I can kind of demonstrate it here. Watch, I'm going to set a totem as I'm walking along, right? This sucks. It's actually requiring you to stop. You know, if I attack and then I want to set a totem, I'm having to actually set it. It's like, it's to use WoW terms, it's on the GCD. Like, it is interrupting your ability to do stuff. It's also attackable, so enemies can kill it. Now check out this banner. Watch as I drop a banner. See, I'm just walking along, banner dropped, no issue. I guess there's a little bit of a cooldown on them, and then the same goes for attacking and dropping a banner at the same time. It's off the GCD, if you will. You know, it doesn't have a cast time to it, the same as like Blood Rage. And the bonuses on some of them, Dread and Defiance Banner are pretty decent, but War Banner, or Defensive, I should say, and they are also decent, but War Banner really stands out for me as granting a lot of accuracy rating. The amount of banner effect that you're able to get is pretty high. I don't know exactly what it is at maximum. I don't remember, but you can get 4% more physical damage with melee skills, and then you could potentially get quite a bit more banner effect, and then of course you get more aura effect as well, up to 10% more aura effect. What is this, per Valor? I have no idea how much Valor stacks up and like what the cap on Valor is. I think a lot of that information is still yet to be detailed for players, but the point is, if you're able to get this, let's say you're able to get this like maybe 500% more than the absolute base here, that would mean like 20% more physical damage and also like 40% increased accuracy rating. So on a jug, that could represent a massive increase in damage for something that is an instant skill. I think that's pretty easy to justify using. Also, armor values are just way up. Jug is really good. Like if we look at the Jug changes here, Jug had this node right here, Unbreakable, changed. I thought they were going to remove or do something with the armor from equipped body armor being doubled. I thought they were going to do something with that. I saw a post from Neversink on Twitter earlier saying that you can get base armor, like base body armors in the like 3,000 to 4,000 range. So you could potentially get like 8K flat armor on a Jug body armor. That's buck wild. Now, yes, the armor applying to elemental damage, that has been removed and replaced with a much higher amount. Instead of 8% applying to elemental damage, it's 15% applying to chaos damage taken from hits. The thing is that endurance charges have been buffed. If we look at endurance charges in the patch notes, endurance charges now grant, I think it's 4%. Yeah, 4% elemental damage reduction per endurance charge. So there's a real justification for a lot of Jug builds to come this way and take Unflinching, get more endurance charges, do some endurance charge stacking. Even if it's just like a basic amount, you just get like 5, that's still 20% less LE damage taken. That's pretty crazy. So that's really strong. That definitely synergizes nicely with Bonezone. And then also just, Bone Shatter, it got its damage increased. It did lose the melee strike range distance, but like 338 up from 250, just to slap that into a calculator. 338 divided by 250, like a 35% damage increase. I think that's pretty much the lowest possible end of all of the melee skills that have been buffed. Most of them, I think, were buffed by anywhere from like 85% to like 150% more damage, you know? So yeah, Bonezone was definitely buffed less than others, but on the other hand, it was at such a huge advantage from the onset that it's fine. Okay, now about Steel Champ. I think Steel Champ, you know, I spent some time looking around. As you can see, I'm still in Duelist and Champion in Path of Pathing here. And Steel Champ got some pretty significant changes. First of all, they changed the Fortitude and Unstoppable Hero. They swapped the spots, and then they made it so that Unstoppable Hero, instead of giving you like armor and attack speed and permanent stun immunity, which that's really the one that hurts me the most, is the permanent stun immunity going away. They also got rid of fortification being 20 fortification. It's now 15. This is kind of a bummer. Ultimately, there's not really a way that you're going to get more fortification as a splitting Steel Champion. And there's also still some really, really strong stuff that's been added for this build, so I actually think it's okay. I thought about using Rage with this, but Rage pretty much only comes from melees, and I thought, okay, no problem, banners. We'll do banners, we'll lean into Inspirational, having a lot of value for banners, and then I realized, like, oh, banners are also melee only. So I think you could maybe even justify dropping Inspirational, like that curse, non-curse aura effect is really strong, so I don't know that you would want to go that route. I basically see two options. I think you could come up and take Conqueror, which gives you this like chance on hit, 10% less damage taken or reduced damage taken if you've taunted recently. That will more than compensate for the loss of Fortitude. And then also you take Worthy Foe, and now you are completely incapable of being evaded, you know, guaranteed hits all the time, and then also 20% increased damage on all enemies. That is 2 points to get 20% more damage and 10% damage reduction, so I don't know how much I love that. The alternative would just be sticking with Inspirational 30% aura effect, and then you're just not using banners, unless there is some mechanism by which you can get Valor without being a melee. Since you are playing Splitting Steel, maybe that's an option. You know, Master of Metal is still good. It's still giving you Impale power. It's still giving you armor. It's still giving you extra damage for impaling, so that's still good. And then you would just take First to Strike, Last to Fall. So this is something I'll play around with and think about. This is probably not as juicy of a build as it was before. At least that was my thinking. And then I remembered, oh yeah, Impale. Right. So like First to Strike, Last to Fall, just to finish that thought, you know, you get the Adrenaline lifeline anytime you fall below half health. You get Adrenaline, you recover 25% of your health, you remove all ailments. You also get that insane Adrenaline buff for the next 20 seconds, 100% increased damage, 25% attack, cast, and move speed, and 10% more Fizz DR. That's pretty great. So, you know, I think this taking Worthy Foe and Conqueror and dropping Inspirational is the more like experimental approach. I think First to Strike, Last to Fall, and Inspirational, just sticking with kind of the standard. That kind of makes the most sense to me. And then you just accept that you take 5% more damage, but you have the First to Strike, Last to Fall lifeline, and, you know, ultimately losing 20% attack speed from Unstoppable Hero. Not really the end of the world. The flat armor and evasion, you're going to make that up very easily with the new bases, so I think that's fine. Losing the stun immunity is annoying. I really don't like losing stun immunity, but, you know, it is what it is. You can definitely find other ways to be stun immune. And then we have Impale. Impale has gotten massively expanded. If we can look here, there is this wheel with Impale effect. There is this wheel with Impale effect. There is this wheel with Impales lasting longer and giving you a bunch of Impale chance. And then there is this wheel with Impale effect. There's also a really huge buff to an Impale Mastery here. If we take a look here, not Impaler, the Impale passive mastery that provided 20% overwhelm for Impale now just causes damage with Impales to ignore enemy Fizz damage reduction entirely. So overwhelm, unlike with elemental resistance penetration, you can't overwhelm below 0% physical damage reduction. You can only overwhelm all the way down to 0. So this basically makes it so that you just have 100% overwhelm with Impales, which is crazy. Like in the past, as you can see, 20% overwhelm, that would be fine, but 100% overwhelm is obviously a lot more. So I actually think this build might come through this just fine. It's just like Rage and War Banner don't seem great, or banners, I should say, don't seem great since they're melee only. I don't know that I would want to go in a Warcry direction with this build, but, you know, definitely possible. And then Impales, oh my god, yes, great. Very buffed, Mastery's buffed, Impale is really good. Now, Pox's Righteous Fire Chieftain, that's more Pox's domain, more on him to answer, but there were a couple of nerfs that I noticed. One was to Infernal Cry, if I could spell it right. Infernal Cry no longer covers enemies in ash and stuff. Instead, it does like fizz converted to extra fire damage. It still has the explosion, the combust explosion, but I guess it has more damage on that combust explosion too, so that's neat. Warcry automation I already mentioned, that was nerfed pretty hard, so it does make this build a little bit less convenient. Also, something that really stood out to me was burning damage. The suffix for burning damage, increased damage with bleeding, and poison. Those suffixes can no longer roll, so like that's definitely a nerf to Righteous Fire. But with that being said, like if we look up Fire Trap, 0 results. If we look up Righteous Fire, 0 results. So the base build is still in, I think, pretty good shape. I think it'll still be a good league starter, but not quite as good as it was. Adorned was massively nerfed. Adorned went from 50 to 150 down to 0 to 100% increased effect of all the jewel sockets that it's in. So like high-end versions of the build, high-end versions of Toxic Rain, Pathfinder that would want to go in an Adorned direction. I think both of those have kind of been not gutted. It's definitely still an option, but it is less, less appealing to me. So I think that's fine, right? It kind of opens up an avenue to play some of the newly buffed skills. And there was one other thing that is appealing to me for a lot of builds, but also is good for Righteous Fire. That would be Sion, Sun's Roar. This increased Warcry buff effect, and Warcries have infinite power. As soon as I saw this, I thought about like a ton of different builds went racing through my mind, but being able to use this with the reworked version of Enduring Cry, which now gives you 2% of life regen per second per 5 power, goes up to 25 power. So that's a base of 10% life regen per second. That's a lot. And if you have enough Warcry duration, Warcry effect, you can get that to basically be up all the time. I think you'll have to refresh it every 8 to 10 seconds or so. And then I was playing around in my calculator here. I think you can get around 95% increased Warcry effect with Sion, and then all of the Warcry effect that's in the tree. There's a lot of it. Again, I won't go around and click all of it, but if you take all of the Warcry effect that's in the tree and Sion as a Chieftain, you get like 195% Warcry effect, which would put you around 19.5% life per second from Enduring Cry. But also, there is a new crafted mod replacing one of the Fizz taken as LE mods that gives you Warcry effect. I think it's the Corel Helm effect. I have no idea what the amount is, but the idea that you could also layer that in, you could probably get over double Warcry effect, which means you would be getting around 20% of your life per second. That's pretty crazy, man. So I think that could wind up being really good and actually fix things relatively well for Chieftain and still make Righteous Fire Chieftain be pretty great. Also, another thing on the note of Warcries, I think Urgent Orders is going to be the move for Warcries. Urgent Orders just makes it so that you Warcry a lot faster. And previously, it also would add onto the cooldown, which kind of made it rough to use. That is no longer there. Instead, it just costs more. You can offset that cost. That's definitely doable. So Urgent Orders, I think, is probably going to be the move. Instead of people automating Warcries, they're just going to cast them really, really fast. Just go, and then they're done. Okay, Hexblast Mine Saboteur. This was the one that I kind of thought of like all the stuff, at least until I got to Toxic Rain Pathfinder. I was like, ooh, League Starter number 1. This is the best one. And the only real change to it was the removal of Divine Blessing support, which I was using on Zealotry Aura. And so what I would do is I would just do this. I would just drop Zealotry. Whenever I'm mapping, I would just run Grace and Skitterbots and Grace for mapping. And then if I'm going to do any sort of bossing, once I get to the boss, if I'm doing like Shaper Guardians or something, I would wear Grace and Skitterbots all the way up to the boss. Then I would turn Grace off and turn Zealotry on, do the boss, swap back. Anytime I'm just going to be mapping, Skitterbots and Grace. Anytime I'm just going to be like straight bossing, I'm killing Shapers or whatever, it would be Skitterbots and Zealotry the whole time. No use for Grace. With that being said, I think that's the only change. It's pretty easy to do. Just turn the one aura off and turn the one aura on. You just have to actually remember to do it. Anyhow, I think this might be the best possible League starter in the game that isn't a melee build. It's almost totally unaffected. If we look at the patch notes, I'll type in the word Hexblast. And as you can see, it has lower effectiveness at gem level 1, scaling up to 340%, previously 340% at all gem levels. This is something they've done with all of the spell skills, where they've made them so that they scale up in level, in effectiveness, so that there is more of a progression for spells in the same way that there is for melee skills, attack skills, basically just trying to make it so that spell skills aren't quite so dominant at lower levels. Ultimately, if we really look at the main thing that made this build so strong, it's Pyroclast mines, and Pyroclast mines were literally untouched. If we look at mines at all, there's some stuff that can't be turned into a mine. There's mineral pools that has the word mine in it. Examine has the word mine in it. Stormblast mine, very, very microscopically nerfed in Act 1. Who cares? Ultimately, as soon as you get to Pyroclast mine, it's exactly the same build all the way through until you are doing like in-game bosses. So Hexblast Miner, still insanely strong. Kind of surprised that it made it through in the way that it did, but it has. All right, now I'm going to move on to Toxic Rain Pathfinder, the big build that everyone's been asking about. And I think the most common question is, are you going to play Warden for it? I don't think so at all. I actually think Warden is extremely terrible for any sort of chaos damage. Certainly any sort of Toxic Rain or Caustic Arrow where you're doing chaos damage that's not based on attacks. And that's because like Oath of Summer, Oath of Winter, Oath of Spring, these are all elemental, and they don't have any sort of thing where like your chaos damage can shock or ignite or whatever. It's just based on the idea that you would be doing elemental damage, and we're not. Same with Avatar of the Wilds. I don't really love Mother Skeeching's Bark Skin. I've never really liked that during Affliction League. I don't really think that's really super appealing for the bow play style either. It kind of gives you both armor and physical damage reduction, but then also evasion, and I don't love that combination of things. It almost seems more like a Chieftain bonus, or a champion bonus, where you would want both armor and evasion. And so, it's okay. There's definitely builds that can make it work. Make no mistake, plenty. But I don't really think it fits into the way that I would want to build Toxic Rain, and then, just building on that further doesn't really do anything. And then finally, like most damning, tincture effects apply to your weapons. You can make them apply to ranged weapons, but they apply to like hits, right? Hitting with your weapon. Toxic Rain doesn't really do that, so you're not really going to get any value out of the tinctures. So this is a ascendancy where like these 4 nodes don't do anything, these 3 nodes don't do anything, and these 2 nodes barely do anything. So I think Warden doesn't do anything for Toxic Rain at all. Like it's borderline unascended for Toxic Rain. So I would not play Warden at all. I wouldn't even try to like make it work or even think about it. I think Deadeye could even make more sense than Toxic Rain just simply by going fast. There was one note that I did not put into my notes, or one nerf I didn't put into my notes, and that's that Gathering Winds for Deadeye did get nerfed slightly. Instead of 15% increased effect of Tailwind on you per Gale Force, it's 10%. Not a huge nerf, but it is a bit of a nerf. It definitely nerfs my favorite approach, which is to get a Gathering Winds Flesh and Flame on Toxic Rain and have like 300% move speed. Now that's going to only be like 275 or 280% move speed. Still fine, but very small nerf. Now, I'll start with the good news for Toxic Rain. I definitely think it's still playable as a league start. I actually think it might be more fun. Toxic Rain mana cost was reduced by 1 if we type in Toxic Rain. Toxic Rain now has a mana cost of 6 at gem level 1, previously 7, scaling up to 10 at gem level 20, previously 11. So once you factor in support gems, increasing the mana cost, especially at like high gear levels, if I dick around here a little bit in PoE, pull up my Toxic Rain Pathfinder, I think your increased mana cost is something like 370% cost multiplier, so 271% increased mana. If the mana cost, the base mana cost is 1 lower, like 11 times 3.7129, I did that wrong. 11 times 3.7129, that means your mana cost would be like 40 before any of your other modifiers are being applied, as opposed to 12 times 3.7129, like 44, 45. So you're cutting the base cost, the actual like end cost that you're then reducing with your like ring prefixes and various cost modifier reductions. You're reducing that starting point by 3 or 4. That's actually pretty huge. I think it makes it a lot easier to play the mana version of the build, which is good. I wish they had gone maybe a little further. If they could have gone 2 mana less, I think that would have made Toxic Rain a lot more I don't know, a lot easier to convert over to mana, but I do still think it's good. Now, there are some other things that have changed. Evasion bases, I'm not going to go looking for them in the patch notes, but they've said that they've added new bases to the game, and that means evasion is just like there's more of it available, more evasion bases. You're going to be able to get into much higher levels of evasion. There are also new Eldritch Implicits. I'm going to try and find Eldritch Implicit modifiers for body armor that grant Fizz taken as fire, cold, lightning, and chaos. To me, this indicates that you might be able to run a rare, when you first get through the campaign you're in maps, you're just going to be running garbage gear. You can switch over to Lightning Coil for a little while, do some Fizz Taken as LA conversion for a while to stay alive, and then switch over to a rare body armor that will have a much higher flat life mod on it, like much higher than you're going to get out of the Lightning Coil, not have -60 lightning res, and then potentially have some sort of crafted Fizz Taken as modifier on it to kind of help compensate for that loss of Fizz Taken as cold or Fizz Taken as lightning from the Lightning Coil. I think this can give you a lot more evasion and around, I think, like 100 flat life, like passive modifier flat life. That's pretty good. Early on in gearing, you can also use some rare jewels they've added. I'm sure they're in here somewhere. Maximum resistance. Nope. Elemental resistance, maybe, I don't know. Anyways, somewhere in here there have been added some new rare jewel mods. Here we go. Regular jewels can now roll suffix modifiers for maximum fire, cold, and lightning resist. So early on, when you're still using a lightning coil, maybe you do that for the life of the character. Either way, you can get like several percentage points of lightning res just by running regular jewels that have that as a suffix modifier. That can definitely help with getting a bit of extra tankiness early on. I think that's good. Ultimately, the bad news is that Fizz as Ellie was nerfed. Taste of Hate is completely dead. I don't see a reason to use this. It no longer gives you Fizz taken as cold. It now gives you Fire and Lightning taken as cold. Useless. Not necessary at all, in my opinion. And, Lightning Coil and Cloak of Flames are still both options that will give you Fizz taken as elemental, but that's pretty much it. And I think those two uniques are probably like on their last legs as well. I think they're going to die eventually, so, they'll work for this league, but I don't think they'll work long term. This is going to mean one of three things, actually. One, you just get more evasion, and you're generally still okay. I would say you're probably safer against lots of attacks coming in than you were before. But, it does mean that you will be squishier against big physical hits. You might go down a little bit more from big physical hits, which really, it's a ranger build. The goal is just don't let bosses slam you. And I think that it'll probably wind up feeling the same, or again, maybe even tankier. Option number 2, use Petrified Blood. I don't love that because I don't love the 155 strength requirement that Petrified Blood brings. If I pull up just a new tab here in PoB, or a new skill group in PoB, and type in Petrified. If I can type in Petrified, there we go, Petrified Blood. So, a level 2020 Petrified Blood, obviously it has that 155 skill requirement. So if we look at the max hit that it's providing, it's a lot. It's something like 20-25% more max hit, and because of the way it works, your life flask is able to chew through it. So I think this is probably going to be the move, especially for very early on after finishing the campaign. Use Petrified Blood. You could maybe even use that instead of Grace, and then that would help with mana reservation situation when you're still kind of getting your mana res up to snuff, because the cost on it is 35 as opposed to the 50 from Grace, Malevolence, Haste, etc. Petrified Blood is not my favorite, don't love it, but I think that's probably the go-to fix right off the bat. And then option number 3, you kind of do it like I remember everybody basically played and built Toxic Rain Pathfinder 5 years ago or 4 years ago, where you use armor as well as evasion. I don't love this for the same reason as Petrified Blood. The strength requirement's too high. The mana reservation is also tough to deal with if you're going to use Determination. And Determination was nerfed harder than Grace. If we look at the actual nerfs to Grace, not the Ruthless nerf. Okay, Grace, it still gives you increased evasion or more evasion rating, but you can see it was nerfed from 2575 flat evasion down to 1545. I need to invert that. Okay, so 40% nerf, 40% less, and then Determination, the flat armor that it provided, was exactly a 50% nerf. So Grace is technically less nerfed than Determ was, so I think Grace is probably going to be just fine, and that is the approach I'm going to go with, right? I'm going to be going with Grace as my defensive aura of choice, but, you know, determination, armor, it is definitely a possibility. Unfortunately, that's not all. Divine Blessing support was also nerfed. I'm actually happy about this. Even though it is definitely a big fat nerf, it was a maintenance buff to constantly maintain Malevolence, and it wasn't really very fun to maintain, and I think it is better for the health of the game to remove stuff that isn't fun and then balance around that power being gone. I think the solution is pretty simple. You just drop Purity of Elements, so that is the approach that I'm going to take. If I can find where I put my auras here. Where did I put my auras? Haste, Grace, Purity of Elements is gone, and then you just slot in, you know, you have Haste, Grace, and Malevolence, and then there you go. Purity of Elements is no more. Now, what do we do to deal with elemental ailments? I think the fix for this is that you probably just use Brine King initially to deal with being frozen and chilled, and then you switch over to Storm Shroud long-term to be ailment immune, and you commit one of your flask suffixes to exactly that. That's kind of how I built the like high-end Clarity Watcher's Eye version of the build in the past. You just get shock immunity on a flask suffix, and then you use the Storm Shroud in that build, and then now that applies to all ailments, and now you're ailment immune and you're good to go. That is the approach I think I'm going to be suggesting, the approach I would be taking in playing this. You know, Purity Watcher's Eye mods that give Fizz taken as elemental damage have been nerfed, so I ultimately think this is for the best, just dropping Purity. I think Purity's not dead. You can use it early on in mapping, early on in the end game, but ultimately I do think it is pretty much a dead skill at the high end of character progression now, and that's okay, right? You use it as a crutch early on, and then you move on from it. Fine. There are also some other defensive options, and I'm really thinking about going back to the old ways here and bringing back Divine Flesh. This is a notable that you get from Glorious Vanity, sacrificed to, I think this is Shabakwa, right? Shabakwa? Yeah, Divine Flesh comes from Shabakwa, Timeless Jewels, Glorious Vanities, and so it gives you all damage taken bypasses Energy Shield, so Energy Shield is effectively useless, which is fine. Then 50% of all LE damage is taken as Chaos damage instead, and then you get +5 max Chaos res. This wasn't nerfed, this wasn't killed. In fact, let's double check. Divine Flesh, totally fine. It's skated through. So you can use Divine Flesh to you know, to like really juice up your Chaos res. You can get Chaos res from several different sources. I have written some of those down here. You can get Born of Chaos on a small passive cluster jewel with +3 to maximum Chaos. That is an option. That'll give you between Divine Flesh and Born of Chaos, that's 8 max Chaos. That'll get you up to 83. There are some other things. There's a new or not new base, but a redesigned base from Ritual, the Penitent Mask, +4 to max Chaos res, and you're crushed. Your crush means 15% less Fizz damage reduction. But if you're sitting at 0 Fizz damage reduction, if what you're using is instead of any sort of like armor or Fizz damage reduction at all, you're using a bunch of evasion, a bunch of grace, and then you're using like Petrified Blood to stagger that damage, then, you know, 0. Well, I was going to say 0 minus 15 is 0, but you know what? In this case, it is 0. Actually, in Path of Exile, yes, 0 minus 15 is still 0. So you could do this and then get 4 max Chaos. Potentially between those, you could get like 4 from this and 3 from Born of Chaos and 5 from Divine Flesh. And then that would put you in the like 80, what is that, 87 max Chaos res, and then half of that is applying to all the LE res or LE damage you take, and that could make you very, very tanky against basically everything except for like physical slams, and you just don't get hit by those, and then I think you're good. You can also use this to like get away with running a Jade Flask long term and really having super high evasion instead of the like piddly little whatever it is I've had in the past of evasion, like 20k evasion. You could be rocking like much higher evasion rating long term and really, really be just like a lot more capable of staying alive. But wait, there's more. GGG added new mana cost with attacks nodes. You get 35% reduced mana cost of attacks for 3 points, which is a bit of an investment, I have to admit. The life mastery that made it so that mana cost was converted to life, 30% of that is now 15%, so that's a bit of a nerf, but still, between those nodes, that's still 50% reduced cost of Toxic Rain. That also stacks with the Eldritch Helm implicits. It's for around 75% reduced cost, which is pretty amazing. I mean, that's pretty substantial if we look at like the mana cost here. You know, this is without the PoE having yet been updated. You know, using a Clarity Watcher's Eye, that was potentially up to 10 flat mana cost reduction. You might be able to get away with not using a Clarity Watcher's Eye at all to make mana based Toxic Rain work, and that's pretty exciting. You can definitely get away with using like a Mana Forged Arrows setup as well. Just in the old version of this, I have Toxic Rain of Withering, Mana Forged Arrows, GMP, Culling Strike, Frenzy, Ensnaring Arrow, kind of a utility setup for bossing. You could also do a Mana Forged Arrows Caustic Arrow setup for clear. Ultimately, this would have an smoother, faster, better playstyle than before, now that you don't have to worry about using Divine Blessing support and you have some support in the passive tree to reduce the cost of your skills and kind of make that just a lot easier to get working without necessarily needing a Watcher's Eye specifically. I think early on in mapping and heisting day one stuff, you will still use Haste, Purity, and Grace, and that means you would skip Malevolence for a bit, but just like for easy content. As soon as you can afford to not run Purity of Elements, I think you give that up, and that is pretty much that as far as mana and auras and Divine Blessing support goes. So with all of this being said, I'm super positive on Toxic Rain going into the coming league. I think it is still exactly as good as it always has been as a league starter and as a solo self-found build. For late in-game optimization, I think it can and probably will work super well, but obviously you won't have as much Fizz Taken as Heli available. You won't have Taste of Hate available to shore up your defenses as you kind of head into the mid to late parts of the late game. And finally, what am I going to be league starting? I have no idea. I really want to play a slam build. I think there are a lot of options that look super awesome. A Warcry Chieftain build seems amazing. Some kind of banner champion seems really good too. I think War Banner is completely insane. There's definitely a ton of possibilities, ton of possible builds. I don't really know. Juggernaut is looking like a front runner for the strongest ascendancy in the game. I think that the increase to armor in conjunction with Unbreakable is so strong. The increase in the value of endurance charges in conjunction with Unflinching is so strong. Juggernaut's looking really good. Obviously, I still love Toxic Rain Pathfinder. It's definitely a possibility as well. It's super strong on a budget. It's very fast. It has all the same upside it always has. I just haven't really made a decision yet either way. We're definitely going to work on a lot more, talk about a lot more, talk about the massive number of changes, and I'm working on the next video right now. And all right, I think that pretty much covers it. Thanks for watching. Bye.